From the Podcast Detroit studios and Zoom everywhere else, The Making of Champions. Professional boxers inspiring amateur athletes to become champions. Presented by Joe Louis, champion of them all bourbon, in association with USA Boxing, Golden Gloves of America, and BigFightWeekend.com. Join your hosts, Tonya Cole and Marquis Johns, with special guests from around the world of amateur and pro boxing, celebrating the legacy of Joe Louis, whose status as the first African-American national hero showed the importance of being a leader and a role model inside and outside of the ring.
Happy New Year and welcome to this episode of the Making of Champions podcast. And of course, I have with me Marquis Johns. Happy New Year to you. How are you doing?
Pretty good, Tonya. New year, same guys. Looking forward to the new year of boxing and everything that's going on with us for the Making of Champions.
That's right. But it's not quite the same guy, because right now you're sponsoring the podcast for us. And so I have to say, thank you so much for doing that. So things have changed a bit for us for the Making of Champions.
Well, the one thing with the podcast, and I thought that was a great opportunity when I signed on with you guys, was just an opportunity to get in depth with the fighters and just getting a chance to actually hear their stories, which is what the show is all about.
Right. And of course, I'm adding in the legacy of Joe Louis there. His legacy as the longest reigning world heavyweight champion and America's first African-American national hero, of course, is one of strength and heroism, perseverance and sacrifice, and patriotism and inspiration. And so his legacy has been growing day by day. And of course, with all of our work, everything that's happening in current events, this is also timely to inspire a new generation of amateur boxers. And so you've seen a lot on both ends, both on the professional end, as well as with the amateur end. And what do you think all of this means?
In terms of the Joe Louis streak, as reigning title defenses, the one thing that was interesting this year that we learned was it was almost had a chance to be broken by Cecilia Brækhus in that championship match she had earlier this year against Jessica McCaffrey. Unfortunately, Cecilia Brækhus unfortunately came up short. So that title that Joe Louis has as longest reigning was going to be for a long time. But in the impact of that, the players, not players, the fighters had in terms of impact going on, especially during these times. The one thing we do realize with these fighters is that they use boxing as an outlet to escape what the situations that they're in, either their living conditions or just the neighborhoods that they're in, just to look for a better way out. And this is what boxing has done for them.
And do you realize one thing about Joe Louis? Before he became the heavyweight champion, 3 years prior to that, there were almost no prominent Black African-American athletes out there. Very few, of course, as you know, in boxing, none in Major League Baseball. And look at what's happening right now in terms of the Negro baseball leagues. None in professional football, very few in college football and basketball. It's interesting to see how far we've come from that time back when Joe Louis was making those strides until what's happening now in current events. So one thing that this podcast hopes to highlight is what it takes to be a champion by meeting the athletes, not only doing that, but talking to promoters and community leaders to recognize that boxing is not just a sport, but it's about finding out more about the other, about reaching someone who's different than oneself, along with overcoming those obstacles and challenges, whether it's in the ring or within your own community. I want to kind of go back a little bit with you, Marquis, and I want you to sort of fill us in on what is Big Fight Weekend. And since you have that as a literary platform, what do you talk about when it comes to your work with Big Fight Weekend? And we'll try to dovetail it into what we're doing over here with the Making of Champions.
Absolutely. What we do over at Big Fight Weekend is we keep up with the latest and great in terms of boxing news, past, present, and future. Usually if there's a historical event that takes place on a certain day, we keep up with it. But for the general part of it, we do keep up with the current fighters and actions of what they're doing, what they're getting into, who they're matching up with, and pretty much their thoughts on how they perceive themselves in the ring as the day goes on. The one thing that Big Fight Weekend does do different from other boxing sites that I think is a great thing is that we are able to pretty much have a non-conform platform for it, where we can pretty much say what we want in terms of the opinions of it, as well as the views of it. If something's not good, it's not good. We can write about it. If it's not bad, it's not bad. We get to write about it. And not have the restraints of having any corporate backing or anything behind us saying, hey, I wouldn't write that if I was you, or anything of a higher end.
I got it. And so how would you dovetail that into what we're doing over here with the Making of Champions? We know that focusing in on Joe Louis's legacy is our primary goal, as well as supporting the ventures of amateur athletes.
In terms of what we're doing to Make It Champions, the one thing I did like about it, especially interviewing fighters here, is that it gives the option to pretty much speak with the fighters about their stories and how we can use that story as well on the website in terms of how to get inside their minds and how what makes them tick and what makes them strive to create, pretty much go after what they're wanting, which is more often than not to be the best in boxing one way or another, as we call here, Making of Champions. The one thing that I did realize when we're doing the show, just speaking to every fighter, no matter which one it was, man, woman, age, race, creed, color, religion, the one thing that always drove them was them. That's the one consistent that I've learned doing the show with you guys. And the big thing that I realized as well with this, and I'm going to mention David Perez is one of the fighters that we talked to as well about this. Mm-hmm. He mentioned how pretty much he was looking just to do the best at everything he's done, so much to where he's even getting into acting and doing the same thing.
You know what, David, one thing I noticed about you is that you're known as being very quick and accurate. And so by the end of that match, Gabriel had a quite different look on his face. He was kind of stammering. He was about to fall over right at the decision point. So you certainly worked him over.
Scores the bout 39-36. For your winner, the red corner, David Perez. David, how do you feel, brother?
And you realize that David Perez was our very first guest together back on July 30th.
Yes.
That was episode 4. That was back when I met you. I'm going to close out with this before we take a quick break. And this is from Dennis Kimbrough, What Makes the Great Great. Mm-hmm. People with legacies are rich in values that endure and qualities that can never be lost. These rare gifts provide contentment and harmony within the soul, and such men and women are labeled legends. In their own special way, they conquer the world. They combat difficulty diligently. They sustain misfortune bravely. They endure poverty and injustice nobly, and they encounter disappointment courageously. But most important, They find peace and happiness in helping others. They hate no one and are envious of no one, but love and respect all. They pray daily. I know they all talked about this. Not more for riches, but for greater wisdom with which to recognize, embrace, and enjoy the wealth they already possess, whether it's riches in money or in family or in experience. They ask no favors of anyone except the privilege of sharing their blessings with others. And they're on good terms with their own conscience, which therefore guides them in everything they do. We'll be back with Making of Champions, and we'll find out a little bit more about our favorite episodes.
Well, let's say hello to senior writer, BigFightWeekend.com, Marquis John.
All right, Marquis, now that we're back, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what have been your most compelling episodes and why. And I know we've had about 15 episodes altogether, stemming back from July 30th up until now. I mean, I can't believe we've only been doing this for about 5 months, but you can break them down however you want to. But what's been your most compelling one and why? And then we can sort of jump around.
One of my favorite episodes, Tonya, that we've done was actually the second time we got on the show, Clay Collard, where he explained to us how his trainer was pretty much how he was Batman and Robin.
This is what I love doing. If you watch me fight, you'll understand. Like, I love fighting. You know.
Yes.
I love it. Everything about it. So, yeah, just my personal life wasn't going too well, and I wanted to fight, and I was trying to fight, and it eventually got too tough, and I had to take a break, and I did move back home, you know, with mom and dad. So, after about 2 years there, I just had enough and had to get back to what I love doing, and that's fighting. So, you know, I moved out, and I got a motorhome, and I was staying in a motorhome, and that was until I met my coach. I actually moved a couple times, moved in with a friend of mine, and got a job at a car wash, like I said, and was just trying to train the whole time, but it didn't really start changing until I met my coach now, and he was just willing to take me in and take me on as a fighter, and you know, let's do this together, and that's what we've done. So it was just hard work, man. Hard work and dedication. I finally made up my mind. This is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to fight, and I'm going to give it everything I have, and win, lose, or draw, you know? And so, yeah, I've been putting in the work nonstop and listening to my coach and trusting my coach. And now I'm 2020 in running for 2020 Fighter of the Year. So,
in terms of dynamic duos, and we've pretty much been picking back like towards the tail end of the episodes we're doing this year in terms of the chemistry between fighter and trainer who trains them and to get in the ring. I thought that was a great comparison because that led to us talking to Charles Conwell the week after, well, shortly afterwards, and he compared it to the Incredibles. And I still want to find out the answer to which one of the Incredibles out of his gym out of the Soul City Boxing in Toledo is the baby, because that's always intriguing to me.
You know, the one thing that compels me about the Clay Collard story is that, you know, yes, he had that deep relationship with his coach. But what intrigued me most is during the second time we talked to him, how he introduced his brother to us. Yes. And we knew all along when we were interviewing him, he was spending quite a bit of time on his younger brother. But he almost spoke about his duty of training his younger brother as almost being more important than his own abilities in the ring. And that's what surprised me and compelled me the most. Also, the story of having gone through illnesses before his fights and then moving on. So he is is he the only boxer that's had COVID that boxed like several weeks after getting better? Supposedly,
actually, he is the only fighter that we've talked to that's had that. Several fighters on some of these earlier top rank shows have had COVID, and they fought later on after the fact. Michaela Meyer earlier during the pandemic had tested positive for it, and say it was the same with Jamel Herring, but it came up as false positives. They were able to reschedule and fight later on in the year.
And I think you went on to repeat that last one, Charles Conwell. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That was an interesting interview as well. I think that was one of our toughest ones, or at least it was for me personally, because it had to deal with a boxer that took the life of another colleague, of someone else.
Absolutely. And when we had Charles on, we tried to talk to him about that. You could tell that he was speaking to him, that he was kind of trying to move on from it. And you can also, I've seen also as well in later interviews, he still is, with the unfortunate passing of Patrick Day, who he fought in the ring and won. And then Patrick Day died shortly afterwards after their contest.
So we've been talking about a lot of your upcoming fights and your more recent fights. I'm going to take you back to a year to actually this month. Tell me a little bit about your fight with Patrick Day.
What about it?
Well, you were there. I think you can tell us. I can preface it a little bit. Patrick Day went down in round 10 and he passed away 4 days later. Tell us a little bit about that fight.
I mean, it's really not much to tell. It's a boxing match, and it was a boxing match. I really can't really say much more about it. If you've seen the fight, you know how the match went, but I really can't say much about it. It was a boxing match. I can't. Really say much about it.
Yeah, that I understand. And actually, just to piggyback off that, because the one thing in a fight on television, like obviously, Charles, you would have known what would have happened. Did you anticipate any of that happening whatsoever?
No, I didn't expect any of it to happen. I don't think nobody go in there expecting something like that to happen. No fight. So yeah, I didn't.
Well, I know in fact you said no one deserves this to happen to them. And I replay the fight over and over in my head thinking, what if this never happened? And why did it happen to you? It was often said that you could not sleep and you wrote a letter about this particular fight. What did you say in this letter?
I just said how I felt. I mean, I just said how I felt. I didn't express myself. I knew I couldn't talk to him personally, so I had to, speak it to the world and just let my emotions go, so I can just feel my. I just feel like I needed to say something to him, like personally, but I can't get in touch with him, so I just sent it out to the universe.
Thing about Charles that I do like about him is that he is a young kid that has a head on his shoulders, and he's just really trying to focus on just being the top at what he can be and just willing to fight whoever can is in front of him. The one thing that's been causing his problem with Conwell is that at his age, challenging him in the ring, Tonya, is pretty much low risk, low reward. So pretty much the people in terms of fight wise have been all but avoiding him. And at this point in this stage of the career, after a few wins, after interviewing with us, he's back now in the top 10 on the actually in the WBA rankings as well as the WBC, to the point where these guys can no longer avoid him in terms of going towards a title eliminator fight and to eventually become a champion.
So you talked about low risk, low reward. Talk about our highest risk boxer. Greg Vendetti comes to mind in terms of taking some of the biggest risks.
Absolutely. When we had Greg on, we tried to pick his brain about his preparation for the fight against Erislandy Lara. And the one thing he mentions was that he told us that he was going to be able to hang with him for a couple of rounds. I'm going to be honest with you, Tonya. I did not expect that when we saw when it was all said and done, once the final actual opening bell rang on that fight card we had against Lara back earlier this year. And not only did he last a few rounds, he lasted all 12 of them.
The whole course, that's right.
The decision, but he gave up a better effort, which actually pretty much had everyone questioning the ability of Lara at this point, as opposed to the ability of Vendetti, which I thought was interesting with him. And also the one thing when we spoke to Greg about that I loved a lot was he seemed like a guy that was really already focused on doing everything outside of the ring. I know when we had Collar on the second time around, he was working out of his gym in Idaho. I know when we tried to get Raul Marquez on a while back, he was working out of his gym in Houston. And it was when we talked to Greg, he was all about working about pretty much doing his personal fitness and training kids out of the gym he was working out of Boston. So,
what are your next plans? I know that there's this new Broadway boxing club out there, and you're working with the youth. What's next for you?
Okay. Well, I mean, after the fight, you know, win or lose, draw, whatever. Yeah. I mean, I work. I'm a plumber. I got a plumbing license, so that's something I do. And I also teach at a couple boxing gyms, a couple title boxing gyms. You know, little classes, do personal training, which you know it's fun. I enjoy it. And yeah, I recently bought some property. You know, I got a couple multifamilies, or one multifamily, I should say, but I'm planning on a couple, and that's going well. You know, working on the houses, things like that, and just trying to, with this money I've made from boxing, I'm trying to generate wealth, not so much just be rich. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to make this stuff like, you know, buying up assets, not liabilities. You know what I'm saying? You won't see me driving anything old, you know, newer than a 10-year-old car for the next probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, it's really it. Just trying to be smart with the money and smart with the cash, and you know, keep teaching the classes and I teach a couple kids up at the Broadway Boxing Club, which is fun. You know, I think that's something that a lot of young boys need now, especially, is just somewhere to put this energy and aggression. Because I mean, let's face it, school it ain't designed for an energetic young kid. I mean, if anyone knows that better, it's me. You know.
Yeah.
So it's good to have a place where they can go and just get it out and not have to worry about whatever, saying something that's mean that hurts someone's feelings or whatever. I mean, you can literally punch each other and get in fights and like not get in trouble. So I think it's a lot of young boys, especially troubled kids, you know, it's good for them. It's good for them to, you know, they build confidence and they build self-esteem, and they don't have to act like a tough guy or anything, because they know they got it. They proved it to themselves in the gym, so they don't have to do it out in the street. You know what I'm saying? So.
You can tell that a lot of these guys that we're talking to as well, especially on the tail end of their careers, are trying to do other things and other avenues out of it.
Absolutely. Now, if we could bounce over to the boxers that are out of the engine room, David Perez and then Rose Anderson, of course, work with a club that do a lot of outreach with the community. Did that remind you of anything? I was intrigued with the work with the Alzheimer's patients there, particularly with David. And then, of course, just the program in general at the engine room.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the whole process of what the engine room is doing out there in Tulsa, where they're having to reach out to pretty much anyone in need of special needs and outreach. When we had Terrence Reed, I thought his story was great as well, because he's one of the mentors as well, trying to get into it.
He's one of the newest ones there at the engine room.
Yeah, he's one of the newest mentors, and he's trying to become turned pro after having a long amateur background. And I thought his story was interesting, because when we spoke to him about that, he was just all about trying to learn and try to build on with other people. And one thing that he mentioned that he liked a lot was seeing the progress that they made when he's trained these folks, like from their first day in, and then what their progress after a few months in just practice training and boxing.
Yes, and I wanted to correct myself there. It was Parkinson's, not Alzheimer's there. So thank you for allowing me to do that. Bouncing over to working at a community gyms, that reminds me a little bit about Lamont Roach and the gym that his father founded. What do you think about the relationship between boxers and their fathers? We heard a lot about that this year too.
Absolutely. The one thing with a lot of these fighters with their families, especially immediate families, is that they are as close to heart as you would expect and are. And especially when we talk to Lamont about it, like you can tell that Lamont with his dad is pretty much hand in hand in terms of his day-to-day prop operations and also just his focus in the ring.
Your father is definitely part of this, and he has stepped in and played a fundamental role in your training. What has your father's influence been on you, and how has that been influential in terms of you being the champion that you are today?
Well, my dad has a hell of an influence on me. He's like Superman to me. And not only because the things he does for me, but the things he does for others as well. But they don't come from a complete home like me. And that's how I kind of know what it feels like, to share that experience through all my friends, because I grew up with them day in and day out, sleeping over their house. I talk to them every day and stuff like that. When they come over our house, my dad is like stepping in, or not stepping in, but that's how they look at him, as a father figure.
It also helps with Lamont when we talked to him about that as well, especially the second time around with the fight that he had, where we spoke to him about a fight where he had pretty much retired the guy he was facing in the ring afterwards. And he laid out to us the process of being the guy, pretty much facing the guy in terms of how he looked on the other end of it.
And the fact that he did not know, I mean, he was so focused on boxing, he really didn't know what the other opponent had planned in terms of ending his career at that point in time. Terrence Reed also has an amazing story of working with his father. His father served as his coach for many, many years before his first bout as a professional boxer too. But as we bounce over to Michelle Rosado and Abner Mares and Raul Marquez, tell me about what their perspective brings to the making of champions. I know we were able to sort of branch out from the amateur and the professional boxers and move into those realms where they're either serving as commentators or promoters or community leaders in the field.
Absolutely. And when we had Raging Babe Michelle Rosado on, the one thing that she mentioned to us that I thought was very impactful was in terms of marketing yourself, is that fighters just need to nowadays be a part of a promotional outlet, which was something that we asked Raul Marquez on, and he pretty much piggybacked and pretty much confirmed as well. That is, at the end of the day, what it needs to be in terms of being marketable, as well as to get that boost of notoriety and popularity in boxing.
Well, see, today, what makes a champion, or what used to make a champion? Because today,
you can give me both answers.
Yeah, like today, all you need is a really good matchmaker. If you have a good matchmaker to develop you and get you to 20-0 and fight for a belt, and you know, these sanctioning bodies and organizations, the way they rank these fighters. I mean, today I was throwing up all over my Twitter about that Trevor Bryan guy, you know, who's ranked #1 in the WBA, but his last 2 fights were against guys who were 4-44. How is he the interim champ when he hasn't fought in 2 years?
2 years,
and yeah. And the last 2 guys before Flores were 4-44. So now, if you're just with the right people and there's a good matchmaker, you could probably become a champion.
What was great about Michelle's story, and the one thing that she laid out for us, is that she was forever relentlessly working to do whatever she can to either put fights on or to be seen in terms of making fights on. She laid out to us as well the great story she had about holding the dinners that she had for women every year before fights with Mayweather, which is with Mayweather Promotions. I thought that was a great piece that we learned from her as well. And also with Raul Marquez, the one thing that I took away from it was Raul was always trying to get better in the ring. And he mentioned that as much when, you know, on his way coming up to becoming an IBF champion, just working with his family, because he came from nothing just to become an Olympian, and just training as hard as he can afterwards for it.
And I rose to the top of the amateur ranks. I mean, I won every title you could think of, from the National Junior Olympics to nationals. I fought international fights. I mean, I fought the Russians, the Cubans, the Germans, Italy. I mean, I was all over the world on the national team, made the Olympic team. Unfortunately, I lost in the quarterfinals, but you know, it was a great experience. I mean, that's something I'll never forget, you know, being on the national team.
Now, there are 2 boxers that we have not talked about. What about Iceman? What brings you to mind with him?
The one thing that we had when we spoke to Iceman before his bout against Surir Matias that I thought was interesting, and he mentioned this to us as well, was that he wanted to have a new look into that fight, because he wanted to pretty much tell everybody in the ring that he's grown up. Before we had him on, he was expecting a daughter who finally was born recently, and he had, like, you know, on the press junkets and everything, they were handing out to media and whatnot. He still had the mohawk, the blonde streak. When we spoke to him, he got rid of all of that, and he just wanted to change to a new look to show that he's a grown man.
Now we're back. Marquis, can you set the stage for us with this upcoming fight?
Absolutely. Malik is facing Serial Matias. People know Matias for one of two things. I personally know him because there's a YouTube video of him knocking out Brendan Prescott that was impressive.
Temporal, muy fuerte, muy fuerte. Vuelve con un opercito corto. Subir, oh, ¿qué pasó ahí? Al cuerpo y es caída.
Secondly, he was also known as the man who faced Maximum Dadashev in his last fight when the unfortunate events of that happening going on. Set the stage for me, Malik. Going into this fight, you're not a toe-to-toe guy like Dadashev, so I'm guessing you're not going to be doing anything along those lines facing Matias.
I can do that, but one thing I was always taught is if I stand toe-to-toe with somebody and I could risk, being hurt for a couple weeks or months and everything like that, I need to be going to the bank afterwards.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I mean, I can bang if I need to, and I can box if I need to. But in this fight, I feel as I'm just need to be sharp, be precise, and be smart defensive wise too.
Marquis, can you be a little bit more specific about what happened in that Dadashev fight?
Absolutely. Back on July 19th last year, that happened in that fight. The co-main event, Serial Matias faced Maxim Dadashev, and the fight was stopped in the 11th round due to pretty much his corner stopping it due to what happened after the fact. What happened afterwards is that he tragically passed away shortly after because of brain damage from too many blows to the head and just taking too much punishment. Obviously, that's something that's unfortunate, and it's really a very sad situation because it doesn't happen on the grand scheme of things and that grand of a scale that often in boxing. It was really a sad event in terms of that. But the one thing about that event that I realized, and it's one thing I wanted to ask you about this, Malik, as well. Does anything like that in your mind ever happen when you think about that in your mind, back of your mind, that this could be the last fight when you step into the ring?
I mean, yeah, of course. That thought always comes across my mind. But this is what I grew up doing. So I mean, it comes with the territory. Some days you're gonna feel like you don't want to do anything. And some days you're going to want to, but that's what we do.
I think one thing that Matias said, he says, no one is prepared to die while looking for your dreams and your goals. Mm-hmm. Supposedly he has a massive power advantage against you because he has a 100% knockout percentage compared to your 61% knockout, percentage. How are you prepared for this particular match? Because when he comes into the ring, he's prepared to knock you out.
I mean, I don't really pay attention, to anybody knockout ratio and everything like that. I mean, everybody that's in this sport, they got knockouts. Yeah. Everyone. It don't matter if you just got one or you have 20.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter but you got knockouts. And to be honest, I look at the type of people that he fought, and he hasn't faced anybody that's like me. Cause I can do both. I can box and I can bang, and I'm smart defensive wise. And I definitely know that he doesn't have a better IQ than me.
Okay, yeah, I noticed some quotes out of Puerto Rico. They're saying that you're tall, long range, you know how to use your distance, you have good defense, and a respectable stick. They said Hawkins is not going to be a walk in the park.
Yeah, I'm definitely not.
Yeah, this scouting report that Tonya just read from those guys out of Puerto Rico, saying that you have a respectable stick. Is that a fair assessment of you? Or do you think you're better than that?
Man, it's kind of both.
Whatever.
Kind of both. Yeah. It doesn't really. I don't really pay attention to what nobody say. Bro, I know what I can do, so it is what it is.
And that unfortunately didn't play out in the ring where Matias was just got the better end of him.
Right.
But speaking to him beforehand, he was prepared and focused for it, and you can tell that he had a plan for Matias, as that it just didn't work out.
Right. And tell us about our last champion, Joseph Hicks Jr., who is one of the captains of the U.S. Olympic team. He had to step away from the rest of his boxing matches due to illness.
Yeah, and the way with Hicks was, as he was captain of the USA team, it's actually a bizarre event because he was the one that was going to lead everybody to the Olympics, these 2021 games. And the one thing I always wonder with Joseph, and when you guys spoke to him, was what got him so far and how heartbreaking must have been to get so far only to have it derailed and completely stopped because of sickness of something that you can't control, and how you come back from that.
Right, right. I know that, speaking of which, 2020 has helped many of us put things in life in perspective. And I wonder if I could ask you, Marquis, what are you looking at in terms of 2021 and the world of boxing, professional boxing and or amateur boxing?
The one thing I'm looking forward to in 2021, especially in the world of boxing, hopefully if these Olympics do come off in Tokyo with the delayed start, see how that
Right.
affects everything in terms of the actual amateur boxers who still stayed around in the amateur ranks. A lot of them that were mentioned on the team that were supposed to be on this team for Tokyo back in, when it was supposed to start back in 2020, pretty much some of them have went pro, such as Haven Brady Jr. and countless others actually. And I'm hoping with this crop for USA at least, to see how they all stand out and how they go up against the world. In the world of boxing, Tonya, I'm looking to see how at the end of the day we're going to get either A, better cards as a whole, and B, the bigger names that we haven't seen in 2020 because of the pandemic in action. A lot of things have hamstrung a lot of promoters and fighters to have access to either eating sparring partners in the ring, fighting in the ring, or just general marketing or promotions like behind the major promotions where they can't get in the ring because there's not enough money for them. So the ones that we didn't see either at the end of this year or during the pandemic, I'm looking forward to seeing how they're going to look this go around in the first quarter of 2021, as pretty much as the world comes back to normal, as well as the world of boxing.
Are there any upcoming fights to look for?
As we're taping this episode this weekend to kick off 2021, the young Instagram model who is well known on Instagram, as well as an undefeated lightweight prospect, Ryan Garcia, is in action on January 2nd out in Dallas. His fight is a title eliminator, which will eventually create him a title shot against Devin Haney for at 135 for that version of the belt. That's the biggest fight in the beginning of this year. Everything else towards that is going to be towards the end of the month in January, where one fight was originally out in Russia, which got canceled because of he caught COVID and offered Beterbiev at light heavyweight. Another one as well that we're looking forward to in 2021, and it's something I've been mentioning jokingly on social, is the return of Adrian Broner in the ring. Tonya is looking forward to be happening at some point in February for Showtime. That's been all but confirmed. We're just trying to find out who he's actually facing.
Okay. Now, with all of this wealth of information that you're giving us, I know we talked during our last sort of breakdown episode when we did some recapping. How do you think that all of this content, between the content that you have with Big Fight Weekend and the content that we have here on the Making of Champions, how do you think that this supports the next generation of champions?
The one thing I think that our show does as well with Big Fight Weekend is it gives everyone listening to us right now as we speak an additional resource of information that you wouldn't find anywhere else. Where it's not often you're going to go to most boxing sites and hear most fighters' stories unless you really dig deep into really archived interviews or something that is not just openly available. That's the one thing I feel that we do here at Making of Champions, as well as at Big Fight Weekend, that we can have that will be more accessible and more instantaneous than anywhere else.
Marquis, I even had to do a little bit of just some background research, even before Joe Louis became a champion. And I ran into, and I know you know what this is, what's called, and I could be pronouncing this wrong, the Marquis of Queensberry rules. Do you know anything about that?
Vaguely. I'm used to the Marquis de Sade rules, where the former French leader was taking over everything and you had no say whatsoever. But go ahead and elaborate on the Queensberry rules for me.
Well, I can't really elaborate too much, but all I know is that it's the code that's generally accepted in terms of the basic rules of the sport of boxing. Did you know that?
I did know parts of that. I didn't know if it was the actual term was actually Queensberry rules or Marquis Queensberry rules. I do know what the Queensberry rules.
It is the Marquis Queensberry rules, and they were the ones that mandated the use of gloves in boxing. And so, of course, every time I'm on one of these podcasts with you, I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, he's such a wealth of information. He's such a gift, not only to Big Fight Weekend, but to the Making of Champions podcast. So I thank you again for that. There's a reason why you are the way you are. So if you get a chance to look that up for our listeners, Marquiss, Marquis of Queensbury Rules. And it dates all the way back to 1865. And that book was published in 1867.
That's a neat little tidbit, and it may parlay into what you see nowadays in every boxing fight beforehand. You usually see the referee gives the fighter their instructions, and at the end of those instructions, you usually hear the exact words from the referee saying, boxers agree, touch gloves. And that's where that may come from all said and done.
So it's kind of destined that you are this wealth of information in the boxing world. So is there anything else you want to add before we get on to the New Year's Eve festivities?
Just in general, the one thing I realized as well, especially just talking with fighters on this show, boxers enjoy their video games, and
they do.
We learned that, and we do realize that Clay was still working when we talked to him about on his Mortal Kombat sleeve, inspired for his fervious play of Mortal Kombat, and as well as Lamont playing. I want to say it was Call of Duty, correct? On the PS5, and how he made current WBO champion Shakur Stevenson and his team quit, which is always fun because boxers are known for talking a lot of noise, and if you're losing in a video game, it's not going to help your cause.
No, it certainly isn't. Did you ever play?
I did not get a hold of. You know what's funny? The PlayStations in my neighborhood are still on back order, believe it or not, which is chaos. And I didn't realize that they were still at the market value that they are. So I'm going to wait a little bit on that.
We'll have to be patient.
I'm gonna be patient on that, but I did get a hold of finally playing Clay in Mortal Kombat, and that didn't turn out so well. He's actually pretty good.
Oh, okay. We might need me on your team. It's been a few years, but you might need me on your team.
I'm gonna need you to play for me. You can't do no worse than I do.
There you go. Okay, so last but not least, we have to recognize you because aren't you a New Year's Day baby?
I am. My birthday actually is on New Year's Day. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of the first ones on New Year's Day. Family reminds me on a constant basis about that. Good courtesy of being at 6:02 a.m. But no, definitely a New Year's baby. New year, new birthday.
Well, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
New Year's and happy birthday to you. As we close out, again, there is some important work that we're doing here in the Making of Champions podcast. Maintaining the legacy of Joe Louis as a boxer, as a military veteran, as a civil rights activist is a huge, huge responsibility and an undertaking that we're embarking on for 2021. Find us on Facebook, on Joe Louis Bourbon. You can also subscribe and find us on our YouTube channel. Where can we find you with Big Fight Weekend? Marquis.
Absolutely, Tonya. You can find me on social at bigfightweekend.com or on Twitter at Weak Sauce Radio.
All right. Happy New Year from Making a Champions podcast. Thank you. Good night.